good night, depending on the time you're watching this, because as you know, this is not like about comics, it's about time traveling. I use my friend Dr. Manhattan to help us here, because for me now it's 5 p.m. in Spain, in the peninsula. But if you're in the other part of Spain, which is, for example, the Canary Islands, it's 4 p.m. And in the east coast of the US, it's 11 a.m. But for Cali, I guess, it's 10 a.m. 8 a.m. in the Pacific West Coast, blah, blah, blah. I don't know the rest, so leave me alone. So that's enough for you. So depending on the time you are, hello, good morning, good afternoon, good night. That's it. Hello, colleague. How are you? How's things?
Things are good. I really can't complain. We're all kind of in the same boat, I think, right now. I was already a hermit before this thing started, so kind of, that part hasn't really changed.
Mm-hmm. How's the situation in Texas in terms of, the vaccination and all that? Is situation is still crazy, or
it's ramping,
things getting better?
It's ramping up. I guess about a week or maybe 2 weeks ago, I don't know, time has no meaning right now, but a week or two ago, they lowered the age to 16 and over. So, but I had already gotten my first dose about 3 weeks ago. So I'm waiting to get an appointment for my second dose, which or a notification. So I should be getting that hopefully in about a week.
Mm-hmm. That's nice. The pace has, it seems like your country has changed since old Joe. Since old Joe got in and said, "Let's do this. Let's do this the right way." Right?
Yeah. I do think that not to get into politics, but I pretty much wear my politics on my sleeve online anyway, and I think it's clear. It's like professionals have stepped in and gotten a handle on things.
Or as a friend told me last week, it's not that the professional has to have the step in; it's that the professional that were there that weren't allowed to do their work. Yeah. Now they're like, okay, you know what you're doing, just do it.
But when I refer to professionals, I mean the professionals that are in charge of those professionals.
Okay, you mean the people in charge of the people in charge?
Meaning, I think people who are actually used to running things and maybe acting at least somewhat in the public interest.
Yeah, somewhat. let's not give them that much credit.
Yeah, there's still politicians. Don't get me wrong, but at least there is some pretense of acting within the public interest.
As a friend that hates politicians used to say, the good politicians are the ones that are so good at faking they care.
Yeah. If you can fake that, you've got it made.
Absolutely. Okay, my name is Victor Frankenstein. From now on, I'm your doctor, and this rotring pen just became syringe. So I just gave you the second shot. Bam! I gave it to everybody else, your family, your friends. Like Jim Carrey, they just became God. Boom. So I just ended the pandemic. What's the thing that you've been missing like crazy since March, and you could be the first thing you could do the moment you're free?
I haven't seen my family in a couple of years now. It's one of those things where generally once a year I would see them, and now it's been since 2019 since I've seen anybody. And I haven't seen my mom and my dad for some time. And they're getting up there in age, and my mom's health is a little dicey sometimes, and I want to see them. So I will probably be, as soon as I can, making a trip home to see them. My girlfriend's going to do the same thing at some point. I think we both desperately kind of want to travel a little bit because we've not been able to do that for a while. So, I think the main thing, but you know what, the main thing is I'd like to eat in a restaurant, even if it's outside. Haven't done that in a year. I'd like to go to a movie theater, or something, you know what I mean? It's like the little things that you get to do when I haven't been able to. One of the things that you do when you work at home is you step out now and then and you do things, just little things, go shopping or go to eat something. I like to sit in a booth in a restaurant and read, haven't been able to do that in a long time. So I'm looking forward to at least approaching normal to a degree where I can do things like that. So
in a way it's about like having a pint of beer, and not caring that maybe you're gonna die or get somebody killed because you're around them.
just meet up with a friend for that beer. I mean, I've not been able to do that. I've got friends here in town I'd love to see, and we just haven't been able to do it. And we've got a nice little enclave of comics pros that live here in Austin. Haven't seen any of them in a year, at least.
It keeps growing, right?
I'm sorry?
The comics community in Austin keeps growing, right?
It is now, yeah. I mean, you've got like Donnie Cates and Megan Hutchinson live here. Becky Cloonan and Michael Conrad live here. Brandon Peterson lives here. There's like a ton of comics pros that live here. David Marquez lives here.
Mm-hmm.
And we all, I think, would like to see each other. But we all also don't want to die, so or make other people die.
Yeah. So there will be time. We know that there's the light by the end of the tunnel. We see it. It's just we hope that the light was closer. but
I'm not getting any younger, David.
I am.
No, you're not.
No, I'm not. Why kid ourselves?
Right.
Did you miss conventions at all?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. It's like when this started, I kind of thought, well, a silver lining is I get a break, because I was doing a lot of conventions, right? But I do miss them. I miss, and I'm very curious to see what they are post pandemic. But I miss talking to fans. I miss hanging out with colleagues, for the dinners afterwards, and all that kind of stuff. It's going to be very interesting to see what 2022 looks like. I don't anticipate I'll be doing much in the way of conventions this year. It's possible I may do one or two near the end of the year, but I'm still nervous about being in a hall with thousands of other people.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always that instinct to want to shake people's hand, and it's just sometimes you do it without thinking about it.
No, absolutely. I remember a couple months ago. I took the dog to the bed. I'm hearing myself in your computer. Okay, now during some seconds I was hearing myself on your side of the conversation, like echoing. It's fine now. It's fine now.
Is it okay?
Something about the connection.
I can always switch to headphones.
No, it's perfect. It's perfect. Now, it was like for 5 seconds, maybe something with the connection. Sorry about that. So I went to the bed, and by the end of the visit, the guy, just give me a hand to shake, and I shook the hand, by instinct. And then a second, I was looking at him like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And he was the same, like, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry." 2 weeks later, like two days later, I had a big cough and flu, and I thought it was COVID, but it was because you don't touch to anybody, you don't talk to anybody. I just got a big cold because he gave it to me. So it's like,
like the last show that I did was C2E2 right at the beginning of the pandemic, and even then everybody was starting to kind of do that. Okay, I'm not going to shake hands, that sort of thing. But you see somebody you haven't seen in a while, and you just go into it, and you're like, and you grasp hands, and you realize as you're grasping hands, oh, I shouldn't have done this. And you're kicking yourself. But what can you do? So, but I'm very curious to see what Artist Alley is going to be like. Is it going to be like a salad bar where you've got like a plastic shield, like a sneeze guard over everybody? And
I don't know. Look, I organize these things, and every time I'm asked, the answer is I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
Because it also depends. For me, it will also depend on what the guest wants. You and me have unfinished business in some conventions around here.
Oh yeah.
And imagine that is by the end of the year that we feel comfortable doing it. You feel comfortable coming, because
if I'm allowed to,
we are in herd immunity, in both ways, whatever.
Yeah.
But my question is always going to be aside of, okay, you feel safe to come? Good. Second is, how do you want to do it?
Yeah.
Do you want to? Because of course they're going to take the measures of how many people and the measures of distance and all that, and telling people not to shake hands.
Yeah.
But also, maybe some guests are going to tell me, I want a plexiglass. And give me my comics by a small hole, and I'm gonna then don't come. If that's the experience you're gonna have, don't come.
maybe it's going to be one of those things where there's like a plexiglass wall with 2 holes and gloves.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
kind of reach through and I don't know. Who knows what this is going to be like? It's going to be interesting, that's for sure.
Yeah, and how can that be a good experience for you? Coming all you guys coming from America to Europe, and saying, the contact with your fans is going to be through plexiglass and a small hole.
I know, right? It's like, so kind of in some ways, it's like, what's the point?
Yeah,
I could do it via Zoom. It's like it's the same effect.
and of course, and you can do, and you can work with your agent to get the comics and sign them at home and send them back.
You know what? I don't want to do that. I mean, I want to meet people. I mean, and at some point, we're going to have to start going out in the world again.
Yeah,
we're just going to have to. And thankfully, I mean, this vaccine has been just such an amazingly swift process, considering how long it would normally take. And the effectiveness of these vaccines seems amazing to me.
Yeah, it's like 3 times better than the flu, and they've been administering that vaccine for decades.
That's why, like, when I see people complaining about the efficacy of like, say, the Johnson and Johnson or the Janssen vaccine, as that it's only in the 60s. I'm like, what a flu vaccine usually is, right? It's like in the 40s. Not even that.
Yeah. It's 30. The average every year, because some years is better, some years is worse.
Right.
But the average for the flu vaccine is in the 30s.
Right. Now, if everybody would just do what they're supposed to do, we could get to this point where maybe we don't have to have a booster every year.
Yep.
Because part of the problem is you've got these mutations that are floating around because people can't stay in their houses.
Yeah.
Stay in your house.
Yeah. No, the big problem we're having here in Europe, not especially in Spain, but in other parts of Europe is really big. Is the mutations. The British mutation is huge.
Yeah.
And the 4th wave is based on that. You cannot control the mutations because people is stupid. People doesn't stay at home. So of course government keeps saying, if you stay at home, there's no mutations.
Yeah.
And we can control this much faster because there's going to be mutations if they keep happening that the vaccines can't control. This is what you're reading.
It's exactly the problem we have here because there's a segment of people who don't take this seriously. Even now, we're more than 500,000 people dead, and even now they don't take it seriously.
No, but we'll talk because the European Union wants to have the vaccination passport, they call it. In July or August. It's especially important. You can imagine for France, Spain, Italy, Greece, the 4 more bigger tourist countries. Of course, everybody in Europe wants to come to Spain or the southern France or Italy.
Exactly,
because that's where you do your vacation. So European Union is saying we are going to expedite the passport so everybody can come to Europe. And Spain is like, roll my finger. Like, what? It's like, we know by Schengen we cannot stop anybody in the airport. It's open borders. But we want people to come, only if their passports say they've been vaccinated and immunized. We don't want that. So there's a struggle between the ones who want to send us people and us saying, we want the people, we need the money, the economy is shit. Yes, but we don't want to suffer, a fifth wave because to send us the rest of the world without a vaccination. So
I mean, we have a situation here where we've got some governors who are outlawing the vaccine passports. The governor of Texas just today announced that he's banning vaccine passports. I think the governor of Florida did the same thing.
Why?
Politics. It has nothing to do with the public health. It has
no, absolutely not, because the vaccine, the passport assures people's health.
We could bitch all day about this.
No, let's not. I'm just surprised about.
Yeah, no, it's surprising.
What is the political gain in saying you're not allowing a passport? It makes no sense.
As I said, I could go on all day.
Yeah. Let's just move on. Since we are talking politics, let's jump to the other side of the fence, which is masochism, which is also talking about comics and about politics. Why, of all the possibilities you have as an artist, you could do anything. Let's say that. why did you choose the masochistic way, which is doing comics?
I love comics. I mean, because to me, it's you have to understand that for me, it was never really about I want to be an artist.
Hmm.
For me, it was about I want to tell stories, and I really like this particular engine for telling a story. Um, and I mean, I've always liked the idea of working, in any kind of a storytelling medium, but I have a particular affinity for uh, the static visual narrative, and I pretty much learned to read from them. I love it. So it's what I always wanted.
Hmm.
And it's not something I can readily explain. It's just something I have an affinity for.
It is something that you've carried forever. I mean, that even when you started reading, it got into your head, this is what I want to do, or is something that, you stopped reading, you finished college to say something, and suddenly you're like, oh, you know what? This is what I want to do.
I
Or is-
wanted to, I wanted to do this when I was in elementary school.
Mhm.
I wanted to do a lot of things. I had thought about being an actor. I had thought about being a writer. I had thought about being in a band. Um, but the one thing that I kept coming back to was comics. Oddly enough, it was the easiest prospect of of all the things that I thought about doing because everything else was such a long shot. But I felt like I could draw pretty well, and I understood at least, or maybe not understood, but at least had a facility for trying to string together pictures into a narrative.
Mhm.
And I don't know. It's like by the time I had hit about 20 or 21, I was already working as an artist. I worked for as an assistant to a former Disney animator and a character designer who lived in my hometown. So I ended up working for him for, I want to say, a couple of years, probably 19 and 20. I worked for him. And then, during this time, sending my portfolio around and going to a couple of cons and meeting other artists, and eventually got a job, and that became 2 jobs, and that became 10 jobs, and just kept right on going. And before you know it, you're 50.
You still look like 40.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. That's what you tell yourself, right?
I am 40. That's
Oh,
what
I'm
no,
sorry.
that's what I tell myself. That I am 40. I go
Yeah.
I go one step more to lie
We're
to
bald
myself.
bearded guys. We're ageless at this point.
Actually, we're, as I always say, we're not old, we're vintage. Like,
We're
we are like like good wines.
exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Look, Peter Herrera Q says, hi, Mr. Hamner from Colombia.
Oh,
And
hello. How are
Pedro de
you?
Mercader, hello, everyone. Were you inspired by Jeff Darrow's work in the making of Red? That balls to the wall treatment of violence reminded me of that. Thank you for your art, Mr. Hamner.
Not necessarily consciously, but I mean, I am a fan of his. Um, but I wouldn't say I had any sort of conscious influence. I mean, you get to a point where hopefully in your career, none of your influences are conscious.
Mhm.
Everybody starts out wanting to look like, I want to look like Mike Mignola, or I want to look like, Rob Liefeld, or I want to, just kind of all up and down the dial. But by the time I did that book, I'd been doing comics for probably at least a decade, probably right around a decade at that point. And I actually point to that book as the book where I started to kind of, in my mind, like that was my stuff. That wasn't me trying to be, any of my studio mates at the time, or any, that was, I felt like that was the threshold where I started to kind of do my stuff. So I didn't really have what I would call uh, um, an overt kind of an influence by anyone. I would say maybe that's where all of my influences kind of came together to be me.
Mhm.
Um, but I do love Jeff Darrow's work. I mean, I think he's phenomenal. I mean,
Is there a difference between, let me say it this way, do you use different brain muscles or artistic muscles when you work on corporation owned comics? I hate that word, but you know what I mean. Characters owned by others, or when it's creator owned. Does it change a lot for you?
It is a different muscle because when you do creator-owned stuff, and I'm due for. I have some creator-owned stuff in the pipe.
Mm-hmm.
There's much more of a world building aspect to it. You're building things from the ground up. The characters are gonna be idiosyncratic to the way you draw them, and no one else probably will ever draw them but you. Whereas, when you do a Superman book or a Batman book or a Wonder Woman book or Spider-Man or Hulk or whatever, there's a definite chain of it's almost like you can pick and choose what works and what doesn't, and you'll do your own version of what you think works, and you're definitely sort of adding a branch to a tree as opposed to planting a tree. So yeah, I mean, it is definitely a different set of muscles you use. I also think that creator-owned stuff is a lot more nerve-wracking because you're really, you are entirely responsible, or you and your writing partner, if you are working with someone, are entirely responsible for the success or failure of the book. You don't have a built-in audience. You don't have a preconceived notion of what you're working on. You don't have an established milieu. You're making it up very often as you go along. And especially in this day of kind of instant reaction that you get from social media, it's terrifying. I'll admit it. I mean, I think I have a creator-owned project that I'm working on with a writer that, again, has not been announced. I have a lot of fear associated with it. I'll admit it, because I want it to be the best that it can be. I want to do my best work for this writer. So we'll see how that shakes out. I mean, obviously the pandemic has kind of thrown everyone's schedules astray. So a lot of it has been kind of pushed to the wayside while I'm surviving,
Of course.
and doing work that can pay, immediately. But yeah, I mean, it's something I'm going to get back to hopefully very soon. And, we'll see how it goes, but, yeah, it's definitely a different set of muscles, to be sure.
In a big way, it's also about not having a safety net, right? Because when you are with Batman, Superman, or any other characters, there's a safety net. The characters, the settings, and you can always, even go back and read some other comics to find something that you don't remember or need as reference. But when it's your own world, there's nothing. It's just
and that's also if I do say a Superman book, I'm one of probably 10 or 15 other artists that are doing a Superman, a story or a project at any given time. There's never a situation where I don't pour my all into a job.
Yeah.
So if I'm doing a Batman book or something like that, it's going to be the best Batman I can do at any given time. But it is simply different than doing a creator-owned thing, because when you do a creator-owned thing, you are putting yourself there more than anything. And if someone hates it, it's very easy to say, "Well, that person hates me because this book is me." More so than doing a Green Lantern book.
And the imposter syndrome kicks in a lot more when you're doing creator-owned, or it does kick in the same way in both cases?
No, I think it's more for me personally on the creator-owned side. But I mean, look, it's always there.
Yeah.
This is going to be the job that everybody figures out. I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah, I remember that somebody asked, Bill Sienkiewicz, about the imposter syndrome and how does he cope and get through it, and he was like, I don't know, I just keep working. It'll go away.
That's all you can do. You just keep working. I do stuff every week where I look at it and go, this is the best I could do. I'm not sure it worked, but I have to just move on to the next thing. That's just all you can do. You just, it's like you're like a shark. If you stop swimming, you'll drown.
Yeah. Carlos Pacheco told me one that the thing that was more difficult for him to understand as a professional artist was to be able to say, to himself, page delivered, page forgotten.
Pretty much.
It took him a while, but the moment he got that into his system, he was like, I can do what I can do. There's a point where you have to stop questioning, if that page could be better.
The advice that I always give to younger creators, especially artists who have been, I knew someone who worked on the same set of samples for like 2 years. And I finally was like, you know what? These samples are never going to be perfect. So what you should do is assess your failures on these pages that you've done and apply them to the next set of pages. Apply the lessons learned to the next set of pages. That's how you move forward. You don't move forward by obsessing about redoing these. You don't learn anything by redoing these same samples over and over again. Do the next thing.
Yeah.
You know?
I never let the new artists repeat the samples. They always ask me, should I redo them? Should I, work on them again? No. You've learned your lessons from these ones. Go to the next ones.
Move on.
But I'm not going to get better if I repeat the same one. No. You get better if you do new ones and apply the things you've learned. If you stay on the same ones, you're not going to learn anything new. You're just going to repeat and repeat and repeat.
You're not going to finish the marathon by running the first 20 feet over and over again.
There you go.
You gotta keep moving forward.
Mm-hmm. I remember one artist that I still work with that could repeat the same head 20 times. Any page.
Yeah.
And once I just told him, do me a favor, scan the first head you do and send it to me. I'll just keep it. I won't say a word.
Yeah.
And after the 12th or 15th time you do it, just tell me to send it back to you. So he did that a couple times, and the 2 times he had, fuck, the first one was the best one. This is what I wanted you to see. It's not going to make it better.
Yeah. Very often, you get to a point where you've been doing this long enough, the first thing you do is always the best. It's because you're not overthinking it. You're just basically doing the way you feel it should be done. And too much refinement actually is a bad thing.
Yeah. Over rendering can be a killer for the work, right? Too.
Well, sure. I mean, I'm not a particularly rendery artist anymore.
No, I know you're not, but I mean in general. Over rendering tends to kill the work because it makes it.
I think it depends on who it is. I mean, there's some artists that are very rendery who I think are brilliant. I mean, you look at somebody like Brian Bolland, who's a very rendery artist, but he's so good at it. I mean, it just works with his stuff. With me, I just generally don't tend to understand rendering, so I avoid it. I do the kind of rendering that I understand, and I kind of leave the other stuff, what I would consider the extraneous stuff, off.
Yeah, with the over rendering,
I sort of ended up figuring out a style that kind of works without a lot of rendering, basically.
Yeah, no, I expressed myself badly. I meant to say overworking, not over rendering.
Overthinking, definitely.
Overthinking, yes. Thank you. That's the exact word. Yes.
Yeah.
By the end of the day, as we said before, you have you have a certain amount of pages to deliver in a month, and the book has to be released. So it's part of being a professional to know. I won't say when to cut corners, but I will say when you have to stop.
You know what? I'll tell you, some of the best work I've ever done has been when I have no time to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I have a lot of time to work on something, I'll fuck around with it. I mean, I will mess around with it like forever. And if I just don't have any time, I got to bang it out. And usually the kind of immediacy of just relying on my instincts rather than my kind of learned knowledge sometimes is a better thing.
Yeah. After 181 episodes in 11 months, I don't remember who it was, but one of the other guests here literally told me, panic makes me really creative.
Yeah, definitely. That's the best way to put it. It also, tends to make me do things like throw my back out, which I'm really creative, but I also can't sit up. It's like that does happen. Yeah.
What is that? Do you remember which was the first name of an artist that you saw in a book? Let me say it this way. Do you remember the first time you remember the name of the artist in a book that stayed with you?
I can think of 2 or 3. I couldn't say like which is the first.
Mm-hmm.
Ramona Fradden was one. Kurt Schaffenberger, Kurt Swan, kind of those early sort of really friendly DC artists,
Yeah.
were probably the earliest ones. And maybe as far as Marvel is concerned, maybe John Romita. But, all of them had in common this kind of really kind of attractive, clean, kind of friendly style. They're very different artists, but, they weren't very angular or rendery, type stuff. Good storytelling, I'd say probably, one of those four were probably the earliest.
And you consider them part of your reference to the style that became CULLY HAMNER, or you think that they are just part of a hodgepodge?
I think they're probably in there somewhere. I don't see how they couldn't be. They were, if they're the artists that basically kind of made me want to draw comics or want to draw, period. They have to be in the soup somewhere, There are other artists that came later or that I discovered later that were probably more informative to what I do now. But yeah, they definitely were the hook, that got me in.
Yeah, there's many, as Greg Capullo told me, you have something that you don't even know many times that is there.
Yeah, like in the basement, basically. It's like, if your work is a building, there are going to be things in the basement maybe you've forgotten about, but they're there. They're helping hold the whole thing up.
Yeah.
I think that there were later artists that were a bigger deal to me, like like a Paul Smith or a Will Eisner or Frank Miller or John Byrne and some of these guys like that. But yeah, there were definitely some early, in the very early 70s when I was a very, very little kid, some of the artists that were kind of what I would call friendlier styles that appealed to me. Yeah,
everybody except that guy Brian Stelfreeze. That we don't talk about him.
Well, he definitely he was a huge influence on me later on, but I didn't meet Brian until when I was 20 or 21.
I was just making fun of him.
Yeah, as you do. Everybody at Gaijin was a big influence. I mean, literally, just by virtue of me being there every day with everybody. And everybody was great, Wasn't a single artist at that studio that wasn't great.
You were fucking a good bunch of geniuses put together.
I agree, I agree. I mean,
and I say you because I include you on that set of geniuses.
Well, I appreciate it.
You're all,
It didn't feel that way at the time, but
I guess it didn't feel that way to anybody else about themselves. About.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Except for Brian Stelfreeze again. No, I'm kidding. But it didn't fit. But that's what it is. And historically, we should consider it like that. Because you guys have influenced how comics look in a big way for the last 20 years.
Did we? I mean, I don't really. It's kind of hard for me to look at it like that. Because it's different when you live it. I mean, it's different when you're there. I mean, people have told me that. But it's it's just hard for me to internalize that because we were just a bunch of young idiots basically sharing.
Yeah, but it's like talking to Howard, shaking.
Yeah,
and they were like having fun, drinking and having drugs and all that. But you say that studio was Simonson, Shaking, Miller, Starling, and you're like, no, we didn't feel it because they didn't at that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you say the name, you see the names and what they were doing at the time they were together in that studio, and you're like, you've been influencing comics for 40 years. No, we are not. Yes, you are.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny is having had dinner with like some of that group, like Walter and Howard and those guys, like just being in a group with them and listening to them it's like you're just in the presence of history, and it's funny. I mean, I can't totally think of them like that because they're guys like anybody else, and they make the same stupid jokes, and they've got in jokes, and they rag on each other, and it really does. That part of it does remind me of, if I'm around Adam or Brian or Dave or any of those guys, where it's like, we've had our ups and downs, but there is a bond there that is kind of never going to go away. Adam used to say it was like being in a band. And,
Hmm.
people move on to their solo careers, but you're still always going to be somewhat associated with that band that had a couple of hits,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I was listed yesterday, because it's the 50th anniversary of Ram, by Paul McCartney, his
Right.
second album, I think, after the Beatles, and it was amazing to read what Rolling Stones, etc., and even some ex-Beatles,
Mhm.
of course Lennon,
Yeah.
and then even Ringo Starr said about the album, about being the biggest piece of shit, being bad pop, blah blah blah, and then you see the time passing and how everybody loves it, especially
Yeah.
the indie bands, and
Yeah.
then and you're like, and even Paul McCartney is asked about it. And it's like, I don't know, I just wanted to make a light album. I was having fun. I didn't give a shit. I did it in Scotland in my house, and self-edited most of the album. And now people are saying that, and then they hate it. I don't care. Literally don't care.
They didn't think that they were doing anything for history. I mean, they just were doing their thing. I always think it's funny when you hear stories about, you know, years after the Beatles were over, and when on Saturday Night Live, when they did that whole bit about offering like $1,000 to the Beatles to reunite on Saturday Night Live, and Paul McCartney and John Lennon were at Paul McCartney's, or I think at John Lennon's house or place or apartment or whatever in New York, watching the show together. And nobody think you think a band breaks up and they don't ever see each other again, and it's like, no, they were hanging out. It just doesn't mean they weren't friends. They just weren't in the band together anymore.
Yeah, this is like Ringo Starr. I read an amazing, if you haven't read it, an amazing interview to Dave Grohl and Ringo Starr about drummers who've become
Yeah.
lead singers. Although in Ringo Starr's case, you know,
Yeah.
it could be it could be argued, but it was an amazing interview about Dave.
Band leaders, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like not singer,
Yeah.
exactly. But
Yeah.
about those roles, and there's a moment when they ask him about about the Beatles. It's like, look, we were really good friends that were together for everything, that could only rely on each other when they were literally chased by everybody around in the hotels and all that. Like, we have a couple problems, but we're still friends. Even if we had a couple years when we weren't talking to each other. But the problem is that the other two died too soon for
Yeah.
people to see us as we were still friends, but people couldn't see it. The moment they saw us break as a group, they thought they hate each other, and that was true for a while. But
Yeah.
it's like everybody, you have bad moments, and then you become friends again.
The thing about it is I mean, I can't speak for anybody but myself.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I've had my ups and downs with everybody at one point or another, but I think I'm on good terms with pretty much everybody.
Mm-hmm.
That was in the studio. If I saw Adam tomorrow, we would go right back to the way we, acted with each other when we were roommates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course.
So it's just that sometimes some things just don't change really.
And all habits die hard, right? You go back in 5 minutes. You just go back to who you were, and you react how you did with your mate. That's the way things work.
Yeah.
What for you? What's more related to comics, if anything? Music, poetry, or movies?
Music.
Thank you.
No, I express things in musical terms a lot.
Mhm.
When I talk about how a writer and an artist should work together, I use jazz analogies a lot.
You just killed my next question. Just so you know, because the next
Oh,
question
really?
was going to
What was your
be:
next
the
question?
comics storytelling for you? Is it a symphony, rock and roll, or jazz?
I think of it. It depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about it from an editorial point of view, it's a symphony. Okay.
Well, it should be a symphony for an editor, but it's not. That's not the
But
reality.
if you're talking about purely the relationship between two creative people and what they're trying to accomplish, to me, that's jazz.
Mhm.
If you're a writer artist, I think it's more along the lines of rock and roll because it's about expressing your own personal attitude.
Mhm.
And but in terms of how I like to work with a writer, very much a jazz kind of a situation.
Mhm. You're more in the school of wanting to get full scripts, or the other way around, which is, I hate the word the Marvel way, but they call it the Marvel way, but Marvel method. Give it to me open, so I decide how to do the composition and storytelling. How do you prefer to work?
You know what? I used to be pretty adamant that I thought that the Marvel method was the best way.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've evolved in that viewpoint to a point where I realize that not everybody is good at the plot thing, because when you're working on a plot, you have to work. You're basically doing your work up to a point. It's a handoff,
Mm-hmm.
So you have to leave enough for the artist to step in and interpret or add their kind of part to the soup. Some writers aren't necessarily cut out for that and don't necessarily understand that way of working,
Mm-hmm.
and are much better at doing a full script and saying, I've worked with plenty of writers who say, you know what, here's a full script, but treat it like a plot. Like if there's things there that you think you can do in a different way or do better, or you want to make a contribution, in that way, go for it. So a lot of times, it's not necessarily about the format of how I'm working so much as it is the person that I'm working with.
Yeah.
When I did Red, Warren gave me full scripts, but there was so much, they breathed so much, there was so much that was left unsaid in the scripts,
Mm-hmm.
that I felt like I was working on a plot and I could add things or combine things or kind of interpret things in a way that really worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
To me, those are the best kinds of scripts. What I don't like is when I get a full script where everything is described down to the angle, and then the person that I'm working with doesn't want to allow for invention or interpretation in any way. That to me is the only situation where I don't really get to enjoy myself.
I've had conversations with those kind of writers, some literally telling them, go write a novel.
Yeah.
If this is what you want, you're not making comics. Comics is about collaboration, and you are trying to have a slave or a minion.
I mean, again, I think it comes down to relationship, because I know artists that want that.
Yeah.
Now, they want a writer to tell them literally everything to do or to draw. And I think those artists tend to be more on the illustration side of it. To them, it's an illustration job. So you give me a description of everything I need to draw, and I will draw everything I need to draw. Me, I like to use the jazz analogy again. I like, for you to play drums and me to play bass, and you lead me somewhere and I'll lead you somewhere, and we end up with something cool, That's what I like. But I certainly don't mind working full script. I mean, not at all, especially if it's a writer that is willing to kind of let me take that full script somewhere.
That's the point, because it could be a full script, but if you find better ways to tell the story, a good writer is always open to them, right? That you move a panel or you change the pace, a good writer is always going to listen and say it works better.
Sure. But you know what? I'm not gonna sit here and say that I always change everything, because very often I'll get a script and I'll see, I wouldn't change a thing about this. This is amazing, And that's happened to me lots of times, where I'm like, wow, this is really something. I'm just gonna. I always look at it in terms of the Hippocratic Oath. Do no harm. Okay. Yeah. Sometimes that means doing the script exactly as written. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that means, man, this script is raw material, and I can add some different ingredients to this and really turn it into something.
Yes.
It just depends. It's a situational thing.
Yeah, that's something I've discussed, often with Jin Ha or Chris Sprouse, and I guess just talk to Chris about it too. Yeah, that when they got a script from Alan Moore, always said in the at the bottom of the page, I don't even remember the exact words, but something like, along the lines of, change if you see a better way to do it. Just change whatever you need. Yeah. And Chris and Jin and Rick Beach and others have always told me, we didn't change anything because his visual imagination was perfect, and we almost never found a way to make it better. If we did, the good thing about Alan that people doesn't understand is that Alan liked us to change it.
I've seen his scripts before, and to me, it always seems to be. I don't think that there's any human way to possibly draw everything that's in the script, but it's all so good that the skill is choosing what you're going to do and trusting that it's all good because it is.
Yeah.
Many
times it's also a big part of why I ask editors in many cases, to change the writer artist denomination to storytellers, because you guys, do you agree with me that you guys create a third entity? There's the writer, there's the artist, but what comes in the end is not what he had in mind, what he or she had in mind, or what you have in mind is something in between that is a new thing. Then it becomes like a third entity who's the real creator.
No, I totally agree. I think that a comic book is a unique thing, and it is a unique marriage between story and visualization. And I use the term visualization on purpose because it's not simply art.
Yeah.
I think the two things come together to form an art. But, I used to get into this argument, I've gotten into this argument with people in Hollywood before, like negotiating contracts and that sort of thing, where I'm like, you're not buying the rights to a script. You're buying the rights to a comic that this writer and I created together. Because there's a tendency in Hollywood to look at the writer as the creator and the artist as a facilitator for the writer's vision.
Yeah.
And it's a misunderstanding of what comics is, of what authorship in comics is. It's not a comic without the artist. But, I think we've also seen that, you need a story. You need the writer too. And sometimes the writer is the artist, but it's a synergy thing, and you can't really have one without the other. But I do think that there's a certain amount of, when it's working the way it should, when it's working really well, there's a certain amount of the writer handing the ball to the artist and the artist interpreting it for the audience.
Yeah.
To use a musical analogy again, one thing I always say is that the writer writes the song, the artist performs the song for the audience. It's still what the writer wrote, but there's a lot that comes through in the performance.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. It said, I was watching the other day on YouTube the Kennedy Center honors, and I was watching back to back the Bruce Springsteen and Sting one because I know that, they each perform in the other because they're really good friends, and how Sting interpret The Rising, or how Bruce Springsteen interprets I Hung My Head, and then you see how they make it their song. So it's like the writer gives me something and then I make it mine. That's what makes it storytelling, right? It's that you just don't take it face value. You have to put it into your brain and give your own interpretation. That's what makes it your story too.
I mean, even to tighten the analogy a little bit, it's almost a difference between music and lyrics. If you sort of analogize lyrics to imagery, which is what lyrics are in a song, it's the imagery. The writer writes the music, the artist does the imagery, writes the lyrics. I don't know. There's any. I don't like to do the analogies too much because one thing I particularly hate is who's the director? The sort of filmic analogy of who's the director, because what that really is about is who's in charge, and I think that's different in every relationship. Sometimes it's the writer, sometimes it's the artist, sometimes it's the editor. It's just one of those things where I think we need to accept that comics are unique. And we can make these analogies all we want, but really what it comes down to is the relationship between a writer and an artist and what they produce in this medium is a very specific thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it does, in the analogies, that analogy doesn't work anyway, because if there's a director, it's both. If there's a DP, it's both. It's the labor of both. It's not just, there's not a line. That's what we were talking about synergy before. Yeah. There's not a line that separates, this is your stuff, this is mine. Well, yeah, I write the words, you draw them. Yes, but that's a simplification that is so ugly, as you said about Hollywood. They just like to simplify things because it makes it easy for them. No, it doesn't work that way.
The who's the director analogy, in my experience, is all it is a pissing contest. That's all it is. It's just a pissing contest, and it's not useful.
No. And where do you think we have to go in terms of that? And I don't mean in relation to all the media, etc., but as it stands for us to be clear with the world about what makes comics different, what makes it unique, and start with the analogies. Make it so easy to understand for people. What we do is this, and this is why it is different, and why is this why this is why it's so important.
I wish I knew. I mean, I wish, it's one of those things where, I mean, I could come up with a bullshit answer that sounds great, but I really wish I knew how to make people understand, what's special about comics, what's special about storytelling in this way, and how to get people to understand what it is that artists do. It's a conundrum. I wish I could come up with an answer for that.
I have two answers that I use with the schools here. And you can tell me now. You know me enough to tell me I'm crazy, and I am. So, yeah. But this is the two ones I always use. One, reading comics gives kids superpowers. One, let me explain why. When you read a comic, you from a young age, you always, the first thing you learn how to do is how to read between the panels.
Sure.
Meaning,
yeah.
You open this, you see the Superman S. And the next second, you don't even need to think about it. You don't even need to see all the panels of opening, walking, running, jumping in the air. No, the next panel is going to be Superman flying. And you don't need anything of that. Your brain has covered all the steps. So what I mean is that when you start reading comics at a young age, then you watch a movie, read a novel, watch a theater play, read a poem, magazine, newspaper, whatever. Always, the comics reader is the one that's never going to take anything face value. We're always going to wonder what's between the lines, what's between everything. Because we've been from the beginning taught, to read, as we said, to find what's not there.
Mm.
So we question things. We approach art in a deeper way because we always know there's something else behind.
And I think it's getting back to the specificity of it. It's a very specific thing. Mm. It is a language.
Yeah.
The reason I know this is because there are people who didn't grow up with it who try to read a comic who can't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, part of that I think is maybe the fault of the artist, because part of your job as an artist is to make it as easy to read as, or not as easy to read, but as a welcoming reading experience. Mm-hmm. You should be able to lead the eye across the page, sort of subliminally tell the reader where to go next. But a lot of people, you put a comic book in front of them and are like, I don't know what to do with this.
Mm-hmm.
And it is very much a language. So I think that maybe the answer to what you're talking about in terms of getting people to appreciate comics more than they do is making them available in as many places as possible.
Yeah.
And that goes into like a very kind of a timely debate right now about like the direct market. And, I don't think it's a situation where we have to kill one market to create another. I don't see why we can't have multiple streams of, getting comics into people's hands. And that means, comic shops, it means bookstores, it means digital, it means any number of things. And we should keep trying all of them until we figure out a way to make it all work. But it's a matter of getting them into people's hands and getting them early, and teaching them, how to read these things.
Yeah. As I said, I pretty much advocate for primary schools to have comics exactly because of the reason you just said. If you start early, it gives you that superpower, which makes you a better reader in general, and you interpret art in a much deeper way.
Of course, the problem is that we're kind of in this sort of culture war situation right now, where people are now arguing over the content of what you give to their kids. And I would argue that there's plenty of comics out there that are appropriate for kids.
Well, yeah,
and they're not all Marvel and DC. I mean, there's plenty of stuff out there. It's just a matter of getting it in their hands, but also getting their getting their communities and their parents to recognize that it's okay for them to read.
Absolutely.
You know?
And it's also, as you said, about having the kind of comics for them. Have Raina Tegelmeier for kids. You have Dogman. You even have Asterix if you want the European way, or Tintin, etc., etc. But by the end of the day, is getting them into their hands. And I agree with you when I hear about the discussions about the formats and and if it's a monthly or not monthly. I always ask the same reason: is do you want TV shows to die? Like, why? Because you're asking me the same question. TV shows are weekly.
Yeah.
Comics are monthly. I don't want to have to choose between my movie, which is the collected edition or the graphic novel, call it whatever you want, or the periodical stuff, because I like both. Why do I have to choose? I want both. I want to have the chance to watch my TV show.
Why you shouldn't be able to have it all.
Exactly. So why do we question that about comics? We need to have a one format. No, we don't. We need to have people be able to choose. It's like Japan. They have those big blocks. They read it on the subway. They throw it away, and if they want it, they get the small books and then get them at home.
The only place I hear these arguments are on the internet.
Yeah.
I don't hear these arguments out in the world. I don't hear these arguments. People like having multiple formats and lots of different ways to get comics. There's no reason why they shouldn't.
Exactly. And there's also, a big growth, and you've been a big part of it, with aside of the superheroes, with what you did in Red, because that got into the world, not only because of the movie, but also because of the movie, which is widening the kind of readership. We don't have that problem in Europe. No, we don't. We have all kinds of comics. Japan doesn't. But the American comics, I discuss it with Howard every time. And we always joke about the need to bring back romance comics.
I agree.
And then when people laugh, we always say, look about a certain era from the 70s, especially from the 80s, when you have kids for the comics for this age, but then the gap disappears. Bigger. And then you have like 4, 5, 7 years where you don't have nothing for a certain age of readers. So we lost them. Every time we lost the readers. Comics lost the readers when you should keep them.
That's a great point.
And now comics are like covering all the bases. And that's why we keep saying we need romance comics, because that's the middle step.
Yeah. I mean, I think we need lots of different genres of comics. But you're right. I mean, I think romance comics, and I don't think romance comics necessarily in the 50s.
No, not like that. No, of course.
But I mean, when you're a teenager, especially when you're, I think when you're a teenager, you're very much concerned with your romantic life and what form your relationships are going to take, and we should absolutely have those for people, and not just. I mean, it goes without saying, not just boy-girl comics, but
absolutely not.
It's for everyone,
Exactly. It's gender identity, becoming yourself, becoming your own person. That all. When I could talk about romance comics, it's exactly about what you just said. Romance for you is a big, when you're a teen, is a huge part of your identity.
Yeah.
She loves me, he loves me, blah, blah, blah. By the end of the day, we want that to be in people's lives as comic creators. So that should involve growth as a person. Right. Gender identity, all of those things that, of course, the 50s couldn't do, we can do them now, right?
I mean, but the point is that you were making is that you don't want people to lose the habit of reading comics. So you got to give them something to read. That means stuff for everybody.
Yes.
We shouldn't narrow our focus to just doing superhero books. But the thing is, I think everybody agrees with that for the most part. It's just a matter of implementing it and making sure that they sell. Because if they don't sell, they're not going to be there.
Absolutely.
So they have to find that audience,
And do you think we're doing it?
I think we're doing it better now than we were 10, 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Way better.
But you think it's enough, or you think we should keep pushing?
I don't think it's ever enough. I think it's got to be an always evolving way of doing it. And, you're talking about it. I think some of the smaller publishers are doing a great job getting into that market. Or I shouldn't say that market. I should say the non-superhero markets, plural. Mm-hmm. There's lots of good stuff out there, and I think that smaller publishers, have really kind of figured out a way to do that they didn't earlier. When I was a teenager, the independent publishers they were making stabs into doing different kinds of material, but they were still generally kind of marketing wise trying to follow like a Marvel and DC paradigm. And I think that a lot of them have figured out that they don't have to do it that way. They can do it in any number of ways. Bookstore market, digital combination, just they can do whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
And they're figuring out how to make money doing that. It's kind of exciting, actually.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you think there is any limit to the stories that comics can tell?
Maybe. I don't know. I've always wanted to try to do a courtroom drama as a comic, because I want to see how you can make that work and not have it seem static. Because the issue is that, unlike films, unlike TV, comics are a medium of static images that are made to seem as if they are moving, and they're not moving forward. So how do you do something that is like a genre, like a courtroom drama, where people are sitting in chairs, and make that visual? That's tough, You don't have actors to kind of electrify it. You don't have music to kind of help things to help the audience respond. You don't have editing in the same way. So how do you do it? I mean, so I think that there are some limits that haven't been pushed yet.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody's going to figure it out. Maybe it'll be me. Maybe it'll be somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. But it's fascinating to try.
Do you agree that that's the reason why horror is so difficult to do in comics? Because people tells me the problem with horror is that you're missing a lot of elements.
Well, you're missing the bump in the night. You're missing the again, the kind of swell of music, or the problem with horror is not the problem, but the issue with horror is a lot of times the best horror is about what you don't see, but what you think, what you're imagining. So, and comics are very much about what you're showing. So you have to have a very deft touch to be able to pull off not seeing something in comics, but implying it.
Mm-hmm.
So horror is it's a conundrum. There have been some people who've done it very well. Not many.
No. That's why I was asking, because I've always thought that, of course, you have the easy comics. Of course, you have everything Bernie Wrightson did, etc. So there's always cases. But by the end of the day, the percentage of comics, horror or maybe science fiction, would be the two ones toughest to touch, right?
Yeah. I mean, science fiction is a whole other problem, just because science fiction generally requires world building, and it requires drawing a lot of detail, because science fiction a lot of times is very, at least visually, is about the detail. People won't accept it otherwise.
Yeah.
Especially if you're doing franchise science fiction. One of the reasons why, the idea of doing a Star Trek comic or a Star Wars comic is frightening, because of having to stay on model with all the stuff and make it look right, and make it look in a way that the audience can accept it. Just depends. I mean, again, you've got your Al Williamson types, who have been are fantastic, Alex Raymond, science fiction stuff. But it just depends on how much time you're willing to give me to do it.
Yeah. And also if you are, I had in the last year, it's funny that you mentioned two artists working in Star Wars. One of them wanted to cut his wrists in 10 days because of, having to stay on model, on character, etc.
Yeah.
It literally asked out. I'm going to die. What?
Not to mention actor likenesses. That's a whole other thing.
Yes, exactly. That was part of it. And the other artist was, having the time of his life.
Yeah.
And it was exactly the same book, and one issue and the next. And you are like, okay, so this one is just so involved into Star Wars. He loves it so much. That's what he wants to do. And the other one feels so constrained. Like, I cannot do what I want. I just have to follow models, and I hate it. So you gotta be a certain build too, right? As an artist, it's just
in this conversation, here's what we've covered. You want to tear your hair out when you're doing creative stuff. When you're when you're like responsible for the entire look and you make all the decisions and you want to tear your hair out when you're beholden to someone else's look. So basically what we've discovered is that comics makes you want to kill yourself.
Remember, I started asking were you so masochistic as to want to do comics? There's a reason for that.
Definitely is that kind of a business, that's for sure.
Pedro Medcal has some more questions. He says, not the collaborative issue of Transmetropolitan. How did you get involved into that world?
I didn't do Transmetropolitan. That was Derek Robertson.
Yeah, I think he guesses something. Pedro,
I did a pinup once.
No, I think he means that one. Yeah, but I'm not sure. Pedro, clarify.
You think he means red?
What?
You think he means red?
No, he's just a collaborative issue. I think he's confusing confusing the book. Pedro, please clarify or tell me in Spanish by WhatsApp or something, and I'll translate. Maybe there's something with the translation. Anyway, he asks, you work really close with Greg Rucka developing the Renee Montoya version of the question. It was a bold move for the legacy of the character. What made you guys think about doing that?
Well, Greg was already heavily involved with that character from the Books of Blood series and from his work on, Gotham Central. And I sort of came in late to the game. They were going to be doing these backup stories, these sort of or co-features, they were calling them, in Detective. And, they asked me to do it, and I came in and, I immediately, I think I read the first script, which was already written. And I just had some ideas about how I wanted her to look. And I think that I think at first, they were maybe for the first day or two, they were kind of resistant. Like, don't change your look, make her look the way she looks in 52 and all that stuff. And I just kind of said, I just have a look in mind. I want to cut her hair. I wanted her to maybe wear suits. Because one thing I love about the question was that look, that sort of suit, overcoat, hat, no face, short hair. And I want her kind of to approximate that look, and, I think that I think at first they were like, who does he think he is, but I did some drawings and, Greg came back to me and he's like, I think I get it. I think I get what you want to do. Just do what you're going to do. And I'll say that, within an issue or two, I think Greg and I were like totally in sync. I mean, we kind of got each other pretty quick. He's one of my good friends now. I mean, like, I love the guy. And we, we're going to work together again on something. But we got in sync pretty quick on that. And I think that might be one of my favorite jobs ever. One of my favorite kind of runs on something ever that I've been involved with.
Okay, Pedro clarifies. He says, Transmetropolitan Special Call, I hate all this, a special issue where you collaborated in a couple pages.
That was a very limited collaboration. It was just basically, I think there were a lot of artists involved in that book. It's like a jam issue kind of a thing. So, the collaboration, if you want to call it that, was pretty small. I didn't really do a whole lot of, interpretation because it had to be in the same book with a bunch of other people. In that situation, you don't really want to basically, run off and do your own thing. You have to fit within a chorus of other artists, right? So I pretty much just drew what was there.
Yeah. Okay. Bruno Lanzarote Perez says, hi, Cully and David. As you know, a singer won the Nobel Prize of Literature, of course, Bob Dylan. Do you think it's possible a comic writer could be in the same situation one day?
Sure. I think it's possible, don't you? I think it's a matter of, and I think it's happening all the time, people accepting comics as literature. It's a visual medium, sure, but it's still a medium to be read. I don't see why not. I think in a world where you have works like Mouse, that is accepted as a work of literature. I think even now at this point, Watchmen is accepted as a work of literature.
Yeah.
So I don't see why you wouldn't have that, that same sort of situation for someone doing comics. Yeah.
But it shouldn't be just the writer, as we said, right?
Well, no, I mean it's I mean, but even then, it's like um, uh, Mouse was a writer artist. I mean
Mhm.
that's it's. I think it's a different. I think when you get into sort of the literary end of things, there might be a different sort of a thing, like an acceptance there that maybe isn't there, when it comes to Hollywood or that sort of thing.
Yeah,
But
that's why here, we have the National Award of Comics.
yeah,
It doesn't separate art. It's just, it's this the artist of the writer, or if you're a writer, an artist, and a writer. No, it's just the best, the
but
award that the government gives every year.
yeah.
To
I
what?
mean, when you look at something like Watchmen, though, I mean, I do get irritated when I see it referred to in the media as simply as Alan Moore's Watchmen.
Absolutely.
Because I'm sorry, that book would not have been the same book without Dave Gibbons. Dave Gibbons is fully half of the reason that book is what it is.
And even more, because I know that many things, you know, Alan wasn't the Alan we know later in terms of of the fame, or artists
Sure.
being okay. I'm not going to touch anything because it's Alan Moore. It wasn't that they were equals. Dave was here in DC Comics, and Alan wasn't. Alan was still the guy from
Yeah.
Swamp Thing, but Dave had a career, and Dave had a lot bigger influence than people was. In the grids and all that. That wasn't Alan Moore's decision. That was Dave, for example.
Well, yeah, I mean, like there a lot of the visual motifs that have been represented in uh, the adaptations of that work that you've seen are Dave. They're
Yep,
not. They're not Alan. They're they're
absolutely,
they're, they're Dave.
absolutely.
Uh, I mean, or I don't even think that's fair. I think it's both of them. I mean, I don't. I think it's such a singular work that it becomes like what you said. It's like Alan was the writer, Dave was the artist, but they together were the storyteller.
Yep.
They become like a single entity.
Exactly, and that's what makes it
Exist
big.
without the other.
That's what I love again about we're talking about America's Best Comics. I remember when I was at the same time seeing Top 10, Tom Strong, Tomorrow Stories, Promethea. I don't remember. I think that was it. Oh, well, and League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. It was
Yeah,
the same writer, but it was so different because it was not the writer. It was about the writer.
they were
And
all the same. They were all the same writer. I mean, yeah, but that's a great example. You look at those books; they're all so different, not just because of the concept, but because of who the artists were.
exactly. Imagine Tom Strong by Jin. As we always make the joke. Imagine Tom Strong by Jin Ha, and Top 10 by Chris Sprouse. You
Yeah,
can't. You
different
can't.
books. Different books. To a lesser extent, right around the time Red came out, Warren had a bunch of these other miniseries coming out of
Yeah.
Homage Comics at the time. So he had like Reload. He had Tokyo Storm Warning. He had Two Step. All these series were completely different because of who was drawing them.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know.
And as we said before, that's the main point. It's comics
Yeah.
because it's not. And again, I go back to what I hate: the big books collections where it says by and only the name of the writer.
Yeah, not my favorite thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand the practical reasons because the way comics are scheduled, a lot of the time, you end up with 10 artists on a long run of something. So there's only so much room on the spine. But yeah, I sort of get it. I mean, I think that's a problem. Maybe there's a different problem there than simply, we only want to acknowledge the writer. It's a problem of the fact that drawing a comic takes a longer time than writing it.
Mhm.
And very often, the way these things are scheduled, everybody's behind the eight ball.
Mhm.
And a writer can write three or four things at once. An artist really can't.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we tend to be a little more on the interchangeable side of things.
Which is something that I think that the pandemic has helped a lot for the companies to see. I mean, with
Yeah.
the books being on hold, but they kept, most of them, artists kept working on them. So that gave them the advance. And that's like, oh my God, what a coincidence that these artists that used to have 3-4 fillings a year is
Yeah.
only having one in a full year, or the other one doesn't have any feelings. It's like you talk to the editors and say, if you schedule it a couple months in advance, or even do a 1 month stop for the book,
Yeah.
You don't need the artist to have to have a break. So which is much better for the book.
Yeah. And one thing that I've noticed actually, and I don't know if this is by design or if this is just the effect of the pandemic or maybe a little bit of both, but at least at a company like DC, I'm starting to notice two things. I'm starting to notice more standalone projects where you have a lead time and you're allowed to kind of work on it for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also noticing more anthologies, which means shorter duration stories. And that's, that tends to be more factory-ish, like people are part of a machine and they're kind of getting the stuff out there. But since the page counts are shorter per artist, you tend to have the same people doing multiple parts of the story and are able to kind of produce on a more regular clip. Both of those things I think are good as far as keeping one artist on something. We'll see how that shakes out. I mean, I've been on kind of both ends of that spectrum. So,
yeah. And by the end of the days, it should be, in an ideal world, about publishers having the opportunity to have both kind of artists, speedier ones and slower ones in different projects working at the same time, right? Like, Black Label or whatever Marvel does, saying, okay, this kind of project is for this kind of artist who's going to take longer, and we'll have the other artists who are equally good but faster. It's not about quality, it's about, it's about speed. You need guys for the monthly and you need guys for other projects. So by the end of the day, I think the pandemic is helping the publishers realize that, we should have both kind of projects so everybody can keep working and not being affected, because what the reader wants is for you to have to do the 5-6 fucking issues, not having one issue in the middle or something like that, right?
I think the pandemic, when we look back on it in history, I think, at least in comics history, I think we're going to see that maybe it caused some things to happen that needed to happen structurally in the business and in all quarters, in all parts of the business.
Yeah. So,
I think that 2022, 2023 is going to be really interesting in this business.
I hope what a lot of people is predicting happens, which is being so much time. Well, first, the numbers, at least in Spain and then in total in the US, the same thing. The number of readership has grown exponentially. A lot more people is reading comics, and a lot of people who have left and is coming back. So the numbers have been really good, and same for comic stores. But also it's the second side, which is the amazing explosion of creation that's going to happen because of everybody being at home and having all the time to think. And you need to create, because if you don't create, you fucking explode.
Between bouts of crying and and of course sleeping 18 hours a day. No, I'm just kidding. But you know what I mean? It's like I think we've all just been through a hell of a time. I think everybody is just ready to move on with things and ready to be creative and ready to really kind of bust out in 2022.
Yeah, absolutely. Pedro asked if there's any chance to see. Well, you in a way you covered this before. Any chance to see some creator-owned comics from you in the near future?
Yes, like I said, I have a project that I have kind of on my desk, and it's sort of waiting for me to kind of get the time and get the courage to to do it. I mean, I've sort of worked on it here and there a little bit, but there is something in the offing that I'm going to do with a writer that I've worked with before, and it should be pretty cool. I have work for hire stuff in the pipe too, so
you have to pay the bills. I
got to pay the bills, yeah. But it's one of those things where believe me, it's like I've got stuff that it's going to be out there eventually. Yeah,
good. And they also ask if there's any new work for you with Greg Rucka in the near future too.
Maybe.
Let's just leave it there. We don't stop asking about that.
Look, we're going to work together again at some point, which I said in the interview. So,
what is a character that you've always wanted to work with that you've never had the chance yet?
Well, the one that I always talk about is I'd love to do Shazam. That's like one of my favorite childhood kind of characters. There are lots of them. I mean, like I've never really. I mean, there are characters that I have touched before. Like I've done a little bit of Daredevil. I've done a little bit of Captain America. I've done a little bit of Spider-Man. I've never really done a real thing with any of those characters. Black Widow would be fun. What else? I mean, like, I mean, I still don't feel like I've done my definitive kind of Batman story yet. I don't know. There's lots of stuff out there. To me, it's a lot more about who I'm working with.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot more about what the premise is, what the take is on any given character. Like a lot of the stuff that I'm known for, whether it's like The Question or Blue Beetle, or it's not like I was a giant Blue Beetle fan. You know what I mean? It's not like, I mean, I was sort of a fan of The Question. I wasn't necessarily a fan of the Renee Montoya Question,
Mm-hmm.
but when I saw the take, when I saw who I would be working with, it kind of quickly became something that I was in love with doing.
That's the other side of the question.
Yeah.
But no pun intended. Is it about the character or is it about the story? It's about the what if they tell you want to work with this character, it's like I know I need to read the pitch first and see if I'm interested in doing it.
It's kind of about the story. If somebody comes to me with an interesting pitch, it could even just be an elevator pitch, like something simple. But if it's the trifecta of, I like that character, I like that pitch, I like this writer, or this situation or whatever, I'm down.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Hi from Vancouver, Canada, says Alan Mack. Hello, Alan. How are you? Is there any stories that you've wanted to tell, and we've almost in the 1 hour and 30 minutes mark, so I guess I need.
I have work to do, David.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. Is there any stories that you've been wanting to tell, personal or otherwise, forever, being as a writer or just an artist, and to collaborate with somebody else to take it, that you've been stopping yourself from doing, saying, I'm not ready yet because it's too close to you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. More than one. I have a creator-owned idea that has taken several forms since I was in my 20s. And there was one particular idea, and I'm not going to say what it is, but it's a creator-owned book that I was going to do in my 20s that, for a number of different reasons, didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I look back on the idea now, and I say, well, that's an idea that a 23-year-old guy came up with. Really wouldn't work in 2021. But these little parts of it I could take and transpose into this other story that I have, and it would be really cool. There is one particular idea that I'd like to do, a creator-owned thing that is something that at least pieces of it have been floating around in my head for years, for decades. But yeah, I mean, I've got several stories like that where I either I would like to do someday, or I've been waiting till I'm capable of doing them, or doing them justice, or whatever. Yeah, I've got stories like that. I'm not going to tell you what they are.
No. I don't want to know. I always ask this question, and I never want to know. Honestly, it's like it is there, and the second part of the question is it going to happen, or do you think that it's going to be always floating in your head, but you're never going to do it?
That's an open question. I like to think that they are, but I tell myself a lot of stuff that maybe might not ever happen. I don't know.
And the last one, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
In a restaurant would be nice.
Okay, stop. That's the best question. That's the best question possible. No.
I mean, I would hope in 5 years maybe with another creator-owned series under my belt. Hopefully more than one. We'll see. I don't know. I hope I'm still working. I hope I'm still doing the best work I can do. I hope people still appreciate it. Because I am kind of getting into that sort of age group where a lot of people tend to kind of float out of the business, and I don't want to. I want to stay. I want to keep doing work that is vital in some way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's what I hope I'm doing in 5 years.
With other professions, you have the question of are you going to retire, or you keep working until you can't anymore. And with comic artists, or writers, that usually doesn't happen. The answer always no, retire. What's that?
Yeah, you don't hear retirement very often. That's why it was so annoying when like when that whole Stuart Eminem thing happened, where there was that rumor going around that he had retired, which I can tell you right now. I mean, he has said bugs the crap out of him because he never said that.
No, he never. And I remember Wade Kissinger. Yeah, and I remember Wade Kissinger also got very mad, saying he never said that. Stop.
He never said that. It was a rumor that was going around. But I remember even at the time before he clarified, I'm like, he's not retiring. He's not going to stop working. He's just going to do stuff he's going to do his own stuff maybe, or he's going to do something different. He's just, but he's not. He's too good to retire. He's at the top of his game. It's like, and I think a lot of creative people are like that. It's like retire. Well, what's that?
Yeah.
I mean, comics people don't retire. We just work until we can't anymore. Sometimes we keep working even after we can't.
Yeah, absolutely. And also this, I guess, and this is the last one, promised. There's also something that is the urge to tell stories, right? You just have to. It's like for you creators, especially comics, you just have to tell stories. You can't stop.
I've told people in my family this. It's like, there's what you do and then there's what you are. It's like I don't do comics. Comics is part of who I am.
Mm-hmm.
I can't not do comics. And you asked earlier why I would what kind of got me into doing comics, and because I can't not do comics.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the way it is.
And with that, nice, good people, we have to leave because this is the best possible answer in the history of the universe. So we have to leave it there. So with that, thank you, first of all, Cully, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And to all of you, thank you for your questions. And as we said, thank you for being decent. Use your mask, wear your mask, be kind. We're still vaccinating. We don't want people to die. You don't, we don't. So Be decent and take care of people, okay? And wait, look, Blake Roybal has a very good question before we leave. Which comic book have you read the most times?
Man, I'd probably say my run of Miller Daredevils.
That's it. And now we leave. Stop asking questions.
All right.
You could ask questions for the last 90 minutes. So stop now. Okay. So thank you again, Cully. And to all of you, goodbye. See you on Thursday in Spanish with Spanish artists, o las artistas españolas, Marta Masana y Rocío Vidal. Hasta luego. Bye bye.